So I watched my daddy struggle. Some days he was the most awesome dad, the most loving dad, the most compassionate dad. But I didn't understand on those days when the monster showed up that my dad struggled with this. I did have the guidance of my mother who said, your father has a sickness. He was hurt in the war. And that allowed me to have, as I've come to understand now, and how resilient kids are, to have a really deep well of compassion for my dad, because his PTSD was pretty profound. And that's what shaped and designed and informs the work that I do around North America in regards to multi-generational historical trauma, PTSD, and how that affects the many generations, just not the original person who was traumatized or the original warrior who was traumatized, but all of us as a family, all of us as a community, and all of us as a society. And the work I do around the country is called the Gathering of Native Americans. But it includes all of us. As I was saying yesterday in a class, that in the colonialist process, nobody comes out of it unscathed. So it takes all of us as the village to do this work. And that's why today is very, very important. So thank you to Coffee Strong that invited me to come and play with you guys. Bless your hearts. So I'd like to invite my partner in this portion to come on up here, Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me give you a hug, too. It's going to be one of those days, okay? So if you're not a hugger, yeah, we can work with that a little bit. Or a shake a hand, or a head nod. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm Jerry Condon. My partner Helen Jackard and I are really happy to be back up here in the Northwest. We were formerly members of the Seattle chapter, Greater Seattle Veterans for Peace, and but moved out of our Beacon Hill apartment 3 years ago this month and moved into a mobile home, and we've been pretty mobile ever since, and remaining very active with Veterans for Peace. I'm on the National Board of Veterans for Peace, and Veterans for Peace is really, really proud and happy to be a sponsor of this GI Coffeehouse tour, along with a bunch of other great groups, including Iraq Veterans Against the War, Civilian Soldier Alliance, Military Law Task Force of the National Lawyers Guild, Center for Conscience in Action, War Resisters League, Center for Conscience in War, Courage to Resist, March Forward, Catalyst Project, the GI Rights Network, and I think a few other folks have signed in on since we printed this poster. So we've had really, really good support from a lot of great groups. And aside from lending their name to this tour and publicizing it, they all have made donations to cover the upfront costs of the tour, so that the money we've been raising on the tour is all going directly to the 3 coffee houses that we have representatives with us today. That's Coffee Strong, of course, that you're all very familiar with. Here in the Northwest by Joint Base Lewis McChord. We also have, and Alex Bacon has been traveling on behalf of Coffee Strong and has done a lot of the organizing work to make this a successful tour. We also have with us Malachi Muncie. He's an Iraq veteran, two tours in Iraq, and he is the manager of Under the Hood Cafe and Outreach Center at Fort Hood at Killeen, Texas, one of the largest military base in the country. We also have with us Micah Kapp-Schubert, all the way from Germany. And Micah is a German peace activist and who's been working with the U.S. veterans and GIs for quite a while, and is the co-founder and manager of the Clearing Barrel GI Bar and Coffee House in Kaiserslautern, Germany, right next to a constellation of key U.S. military bases. Our tour, we started the tour about 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago. We've been to about 9 or 10 events in 10 different cities in the last 2 weeks, and we're in our final surge here. We have 2 events today. We're going to be in Seattle tonight, if you want to come follow us to Seattle. And then tomorrow, I think our final event tomorrow afternoon in Everett, 1 p.m. in Everett. And we've had a very exciting tour. Actually, even before the tour started, Micah Kapp-Schubert and I went across the border to Playa Tijuana, to meet with a group of deported veterans, a really interesting group of people who were not only pushed out of the military, like some people are being pushed out now with other honorable discharges and no benefits, but they were actually, after joining the military expecting that they would become citizens of the U.S., they've actually been deported and cannot even return to this country where some of them grew up and have families. And in some cases they have felony offenses that are part of that, and other times not. But apparently there was a law passed in 1996 that allowed the immigration authorities to look back in their records 20 years back and, find things like unpaid parking tickets and, marijuana possession offenses and use that as an excuse to push them out of the country altogether. So they're organizing and fighting to come back, and it was a very interesting meeting with them. Micah had been in touch with them on Facebook and the internet. We were very happy to meet them in person, and we're going to stay in touch. We had great events in San Diego and Orange County and Los Angeles, and while we were in LA, we happened to be there on the 10th anniversary of Arlington West, which is Veterans for Peace in Los Angeles, has been putting in all these crosses and remembering all the victims, the U.S. soldiers who were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as those who've killed themselves, as well as the Iraqi and Afghani victims. And they have put out this huge display of crosses and other markers every Sunday on the beach by the Santa Monica Pier. So they got thousands of visitors every week from all over the world. So it's been quite a phenomenon. And they've done that every Sunday, starting like 4 in the morning for 10 years. It's quite remarkable. We also had a wonderful event in San Francisco where a whole bunch of groups came together to put on what they called a pop-up GI Coffeehouse at the Veterans Media Community Media Center on Market Street in downtown San Francisco. So they started on Friday night with various activities, including a dance, and then they had activities all day Saturday, the type of activities that might typically take place at a coffee house, veterans, writers, workshops, and others. Really interesting activities, and then a panel in the evening and an open mic, and it was quite a wonderful event. And after that, we joined Colonel Ann Wright and followed her up to Beale Air Force Base for the monthly protests against the drones there. So we got a lot of exposure along the way. We've had a lot of great events. We've been networking like crazy, and we frankly have been very pleasantly surprised kind of enthusiasm there's been for this tour, because we really didn't know what to expect when we launched it. We thought it might not quite strike the right chord. But we found just the opposite. A lot of people, especially people who had some connection to the GI resistance during Vietnam, and all the way up to the GI resistance during Iraq and Afghanistan, veterans coming out, people who are involved in the GI rights hotline, and other people who are just interested and understand the importance of giving support and alternative information and alternative space for healing and for organizing to active duty GIs. So it's been, we're extremely pleased that it's gone so well. And we've also been doing fairly well on the fundraising front. We're pleased about that too. So I guess without any further ado, I want to turn it over to, I'm sorry, we have a little bit of a different program than we've had some of our nights. So give it back to you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here.
Give him a hand. As we come into our panels, I just need to speak to remember whose land we're standing on, the various canoe nations that are here. And I give thanks for those canoe nations on whose land we stand on, who really respect the work of our warriors and really respect and support the work that we're doing to heal the wounded, to heal people that need to understand and to be understood. So I raise my hands to the various nations in this area, the Squaxin Island, the Nisqually, the Chehalis, the various nations, and I just hold my hands up to them for supporting the work that happens here. You always get reminded, someone will do something or give a motion and to remind you of the work that needs to be done. So thank you, brother. So our first panel will be, and I really want to thank them for coming in and making their time in their lives, we'll be speaking on the Shelter Half Coffeehouse panel. And we're going to be having two panels. The first group will speak, and then we'll introduce a second panel who will continue the conversation. Our first speakers are Allan Poobus, and he's a Vietnam-era draft dodger who aided and abetted GIs and civilians who chose not to serve in that Imperial folly through his participation in the Shelter Half Coffeehouse and other projects. Allan is a Wounded Knee veteran and is already against the next war. I love that. I love that. I might have to add that to my email when I say, I'm already against the next war. And it goes on, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Our other speaker on this panel is Philip Kaplan, and he was a Shelter Half inhabitant and a GI Coffeehouse in Tacoma. During the Vietnam War from 1968 to 1970, after being discharged from the Air Force, he had a multi-decade career working in advocacy for a variety of social justice organizations and causes. Phil is now comfortably retired with his wife and dogs, plural, in Seattle, Washington. Could you please help me welcome our first panel?
It's a privilege to be here. Coffee Sprout was kind enough to invite staff and veterans who, during the war, worked for or enjoyed the services of the Shelter Half. The Shelter Half was far different than, their mission was far different than Coffee Straw. It was a political era. The country was left liberal. Amongst the youth, there was a sense that for a lot of people that we were in a pre-revolutionary state. The thought of addressing the day-to-day needs of folks in the service or vets really didn't cross anybody's mind. Our focus was on confronting the machine, stopping the war. The Shelter Half, my experience with Shelter Half was that of a soldier. I was in the Air Force, and in a lot of ways, outlier. Those folks at Fort Lewis, those in the Army, were experienced military life in the war far different than we in the Air Force. I entered the Air Force a little older than most of my peers and far more politically attuned. That's because I was brought up just outside of New York. I was exposed to Quaker life, Unitarian life. The Fellowship of Reconciliation is centered in Nyack. CORE was a spin-off. I had volunteered in the office of Congressman John Dow, who was one of 7 from 65, to vote against a $700 million authorization bill to fund the escalation of the war after Tonkin incident. I entered the Air Force because I didn't want to go in the Army. I entered the Air Force as a complete dweeb. I had no personality, no ego, nothing. But I entered the Air Force passionately against the war. And I took whatever opportunity I could take to articulate my concerns. Therefore, the folks in my duty section took up a collection to send me to Red China. I got out to the Shelter Half, which when I was there was run by Barbara Garson, who was a wonderful author, wonderful person. She had written a play called Bird. She took Macbeth and had Lady, the Johnsons, threw the Johnson into Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And she gave up all that New York cultural stuff, came out to help run the Shelter Half. A wonderful man like Stan Anderson, an anarchist. And it was a place of acceptance. I was able to get out to the Shelter Half because I had befriended Lyle Quassim Rogers at the time. Some of you know Lyle because he ended up being the director of the Department of Social and Health Services. But we were the base commies. There were relatively few airmen who expressed any political thought, but which was interesting in that, well, the cultural influences penetrated. The political stuff, not so much in the 60s. Lyle and I were young and a little foolhardy. For instance, when the Office of Special Investigation had a softball game against Supply, Lyle and I went, and Lyle would yell, "Piggy won," as OSI batter came up, and I'd yell, "How come you're not wearing brown shirts?" When Lyle's airperson rented a speckled ceiling apartment complex just off the base for airmen. Lyle was a medic, and when his commander went to inspect his apartment, he cut out of a glossy magazine a picture of the retiring general of the Air Force, stuck on his toilet, face up, so when he lifted the lid, they took Lyle seriously because, well, he's black, and they investigated the hell out of him. But, again, the Air Force isn't Prussian, and the one time I really got in trouble was that we were ordered to submit a suggestion, and I wrote, my suggestion was, you can't order people to think. It's a waste of time to order people to think. Lyle and I participated in guerrilla theater production when there was a big anti-war rally at American Lake. Went to a couple of marches in Seattle. We found the Shelter Half to be just a wonderful respite where we could talk to folks who shared values. The Shelter Half evolved. I was at the Shelter Half when, in the fall of 1970, folks from what was called the Cornell Collective came over to came to Tacoma to take over the Shelter Half. These folks viewed themselves as revolutionaries. There were a lot of them, and expanded the role of the Half, attracted more people. These people were absolutely committed, actually thought they were in a pre-revolutionary state. Thanks to Coffee Strong, we had a reunion, and most of the people who were involved back then maintained their commitment maintained their rage. We all politically did different things, but you know, again, it was a wonderful experience for all of us, I think, to have been involved. So, and again, what Coffee Strong is doing now is through providing incredible needed service, is also giving soldiers and vets opportunity to learn more about what their country is doing and has doing, and why it should be seriously questioned. Thank you.
Well, hello. Thank you for coming. I want to start by saying, if you're interested in learning about the history of GI resistance to the war in Vietnam, I would recommend there's a documentary called Sir, No Sir. It's about Fort Lewis, it's about the Shelter Half, it's about the Presidio. I think that Coffee Strong is a copy, and if you ask nice, I'll bet you can get someone from Coffee Strong to show that video for your faith community, your social justice group, your friends, your union, your classmates. It's worth looking at. So I guess where I start is, it's the spring of 1969. I'm 18 years old. I'm in high school. I'm in the high school library, looking at a magazine, Life Look, photojournalism, 2-page spread, full 2 pages, photograph. Men with short hair, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee. There's a wall over here. Pictures, posters. Allen Ginsberg, poet, he's against the war. Ho Chi Minh, poet, he's against the war. And a poster of Geronimo, classic pose, he's on one knee holding his weapon. The caption should have said, Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492, but it didn't. Beneath the photograph, what it did say was, the Shelter Half, Tacoma, Washington, where off-duty GIs meet to down the war. Far out. I'm going to move to Tacoma and go to college, so I'm going to check this out. And I did. And the wall was there, like I described. I guess I need to say, I hung out there. They were college graduates, I was a freshman. They did work with GIs. I did work with my campus anti-war group. And then later I moved on to something called Tacoma Drafted Military Services. But every time the Shelter Half had a demo, I went. We distributed the Lewis McCord Free Press until the MPs came and got us. Took us to the stockade, got fingerprinted and mugshot. And a couple weeks later, I got a letter banning me from Fort Lewis. Cool, that's the point. During my campus time, yeah. I volunteered and became a staff person with a group called Tacoma Drafted Military Services. We had Jeff, who was a military counselor, first GI to be released from the military on his second CO, conscious objective application. And there was Dave. He was the draft counselor. I was the, stamp looker, the envelope stuffer, the phone answerer. But I've got 2 stories I want to tell you about this. The first is about a GI who came into the office. He and Jeff talked, he left. We had a conversation about that meeting. He was on his way to Vietnam, he didn't want to go, he was conflicted, he had moral concerns, he had spiritual concerns. My father was a Methodist minister, and he said, well, this guy, why don't you take your dad to talk to him? Cool, my dad agreed to it. He came to the office, I picked him up, took him home, Mom cooked dinner. He and my dad went to the study, they talked for a long time. He spent the night with us. The next morning, Mom cooked breakfast. We got in the car and we drove to downtown Tacoma. The guy's wearing his uniform. And I said, this is your corner. Somebody's going to come by and say, hey soldier, you want to ride? If you get in the car, they'll take you somewhere and trade your uniform for civilian clothes They'll take you to Seattle, some will take you to Bellingham, some will take you to Canada. Don't know what you want to do, but good luck. If you don't want to go, the bus is over there and you'll be back before the bus. End of story. No punchline. Don't know what happened. Years later, Fred and I are sailing from Tacoma to Gig Harbor. We tie up at the dock at the Tides, go in and get pizza and beer, and this guy approaches our table. Big man, broad, tall, long hair, big beard. And he says, "Hey, don't I know you?" "I don't know. What's up?" "Did you work for the draft counseling office?" "Yeah, I did." And then, big smile, stuck out his hand, said, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For helping me." We helped him go to Canada. He met a woman, they fell in love, they got married, had a couple of kids, and every year, once or twice, they'd sneak down from Canada because his mom wanted to see her grandkids. And he wanted to tell me that, thank you, because I'm happy and healthy, my family is happy and healthy, we live good lives. So, that made me feel good.
Mm.
I was going to skip the part about the Gulf War, but I see Father Bixel here. Hey, Bix. Remember the day the bombing started? Yeah, we were in jail together with a couple other Catholic workers. And, well, we were there, yeah. I think I'll just move on. Glad to see you. Okay. As the first Gulf War built up, I was part of an anti-war organizing group. My name and phone number were posted on the wall because I'd had some experience with draft counseling in the past, and I went to a refresher class, and nobody else knew anything about this. So, one night, the phone rang, and I spoke to a woman who said her husband was a Vietnam veteran with PTSD. Her son was soon to be 18 years old, senior in high school, and she wanted to know, because although there was no draft, young men were still expected to register with the government. Mm-hmm. And I tried to outline his options. You can just ignore them, and when the FBI comes, sign up, and hey, we're even Steven, right? No problem. Or, there's always prison, there's going underground, Europe, whatever. So we sort of settled down. I had no advice, I had options and there's consequences. And then she told me about her husband. I knew several Vietnam veterans with PTSD, and as the war built up, their behavior became more erratic, stressed out, freaked out. And this is what she told me. She woke up one night, and her husband was not there. She got up and looked for him. He was not in the house. She went to the garage. The lights were on, the door was open. She walked down the driveway and saw her husband with a can of gasoline. And he was throwing the gas against the side of the house.
Oh, yeah.
And here's a racist language alert, but I'm going to say what she said, he said. She said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "The gooks are coming, the gooks are coming. We got to burn the hooches. We got to burn the hooches." Which is GI talk for the gooks coming and burn the house down. She said, no, dear, don't do that. Come in the house. We'll talk. And I guess they did. And she called me to tell me about that. And I had nothing to say. I'm sorry. I'm shocked. I didn't know what to tell her. Your husband needs professional counseling. Seriously. And he's not going to get it at the VA. That was then. And this is now. My phone number is unlisted. It's not posted on anybody's wall. But when a woman or a man in the military or veterans needs help, they can call the GI Rights Hotline. They can call Coffee Strong. And someone will pick up that phone and say, "Hello, Coffee Strong, how may I help you?" And they will. As long as someone helps pay for the phone and pay for the rent. I support Coffee Strong. I hope you do too. Thank you very much.